The first light of dawn spilled across Darrenbrook, a small village tucked between weary green hills. The cobblestones were slick from the night's rain, reflecting pale streaks of gold from the rising sun. A cool mist curled around the crooked chimneys, carrying with it the scent of wet earth and distant smoke. At the village edge stood Elara, a 14-year-old girl, barefoot, wearing a thin, faded dress that clung to her small frame in the morning chill. Her tangled brown hair lifted slightly in the breeze as she clutched a frayed ribbon in her hand. A baker passed by with his wife, muttering under his breath, "She's cursed, I tell you," without daring to meet her eyes. Elara's gaze remained fixed on the horizon, lips trembling but silent, her breath clouding faintly in the air. The ribbon, the last piece of her mother, was soft with age and damp from the mist. She felt the weight of the villagers' cold stares, even when they pretended not to look. Something inside told her this morning was different, though she could not yet see why. The creak of wooden wheels echoed down the narrow street as a cart passed, its driver avoiding Elara's eyes. She moved toward the market square, each bare step pressing into damp stones. The air was heavy with the scent of bread and boiled cabbage, but it stirred no hunger, only a dull ache. Children's laughter rang from near the water trough until they spotted her. One boy pointed and whispered, and in an instant the group scattered, leaving the trough's ripples behind. Elara didn't flinch. She had learned silence was her only shield. She leaned closer to the water, her warped reflection breaking with every ripple. Somewhere in that shifting face, she tried to find the girl her mother once told her she could be. The market square was alive with movement, vendors calling over one another, carts rattling on uneven stones, the air thick with smoke from roasting meats. Elara lingered at the edge, her stomach tightening at smells she could not touch. A fishmonger caught sight of her and frowned. "Move along, girl," he barked, swatting the air as if to chase her away. She stepped back, eyes falling to the central fountain, its worn carvings of two dancers, locked in stone embrace. She wondered if the village had once been kinder, or if cruelty had always sat in its bones. A voice broke through the market noise. "Hungry, are you?" An old woman in a patched shawl stood before her, face lined with years. She extended a small piece of bread, steam rising faintly. Elara froze, wary of kindness. "Take it, child," the woman said softly. "I remember your mother." Elara's fingers brushed hers as she took it, a warmth blooming in her chest, before fading under the weight of curious eyes watching from nearby stalls. By midday, clouds had rolled in, dimming the market's colors to shades of gray. Elara sat on the low wall beside the fountain, nibbling the bread in slow, careful bites. Villagers flowed around her like a river parting around a stone. The baker passed again, his eyes narrowing as they met hers. She kept her gaze on the fountain water, its ripples reflecting the darkening sky. The church bell tolled overhead, each heavy note carrying through the streets like a warning only she could hear. The wind sharpened as afternoon shadows stretched across Darrenbrook. Elara had left the market, walking the narrow lane toward the river. The path was flanked by leaning fences and patches of wild grass, swaying under gray clouds. A group of women washing clothes by the bank stopped their chatter as she approached, eyes narrowing. One whispered, "Best not let her shadow touch the water." Elara's steps slowed, but she pressed on, the sound of the river's rush pulling her forward. The water glimmered cold and metallic under the dim light, its surface restless. She crouched at the edge, letting her fingers skim the icy flow, imagining it could wash away the stares, the muttered words, the years of being unwanted. Kneeling at the riverbank, Elara let the frayed ribbon trail into the water, watching its fibers darken as they drank in the cold. She remembered her mother's voice telling her the river carried secrets to far-off places. A sharp voice cut through the thought. "You'll foul the water," one of the washerwomen snapped, stepping closer, bucket in hand. Elara stood quickly, ribbon clutched to her chest, her heart hammering in her ribs. The river continued to move, unbothered, as if carrying her small defiance away downstream. She turned from the river and walked toward the cluster of fields beyond the village. Here, The land opened wide under the heavy sky, the wind carrying the scent of wet soil and wood smoke from distant homes. She paused at a low stone wall, resting her hands on the rough surface. Across the field, a boy about her age was herding goats. When his eyes met hers, he hesitated, then looked away quickly, urging the animals on. Elara didn't move. She had grown used to connections that lasted no longer than a glance. Clouds deepened as the wind picked up, rattling the dry stalks in the field. Elara turned back toward the village, her hair whipping across her face. A sudden peal of laughter rang out from behind, a group of boys tossing stones into the muddy path ahead of her. "Careful, you might curse the ground," one shouted. She kept her gaze fixed on the horizon, stepping around the stones without a word. The air smelled of coming rain, and somewhere in the distance, thunder muttered low. By the time Elara reached the village square, the first drops of rain began to fall, darkening the stones. She stood by the fountain, the ribbon damp in her palm, watching as villagers hurried to shelter. No one invited her inside. The rain quickened, blurring the outlines of the market stalls and rooftops. She tilted her face to the sky, letting the water run down her cheeks, unsure if it was rain or something heavier that made her chest ache. The rain did not stop through the night, and by morning the streets of Darrenbrook glistened under a pale, cold light. Elara woke beneath the warped eaves of an abandoned shed near the village edge, her dress damp and her hair heavy with moisture. She listened to the distant toll of the church bell, each note echoing like a reminder that she was not welcome. Rising to her feet, she brushed away straw from her skirt and stepped onto the slick cobblestones. The scent of wet earth and smoke hung low in the air. Somewhere nearby, a door slammed, and the sound made her flinch before she continued toward the main road. As she walked, a thin trail of water trickled along the road, carrying fallen leaves toward the square. The village felt quieter than usual, though she sensed the watchful eyes behind shuttered windows. She passed a small bakery, the warm scent of bread wafting out, but no greeting came from inside. A pair of girls her age stood at a doorway whispering. One of them giggled and said, "She sleeps with the rats," loud enough for Elara to hear. Her jaw tightened, but she did not slow her pace. The square was nearly empty, save for an old man sweeping rainwater from the stone steps of the church. He paused when he saw her, leaning on his broom. "You ought to leave before the council notices you again," he said, voice low but firm. Elara met his gaze for a heartbeat before lowering her eyes. She knew he was not cruel, but his words carried the same weight as the others, the unspoken truth that she belonged nowhere. She turned away, the ribbon slipping slightly in her hand. She wandered past the square into the narrowest lane in the village, where walls leaned so close they nearly touched. Here, the air was damp and smelled of moss. Rain dripped from sagging roofs, forming shallow puddles that mirrored the dark sky. A black cat slinked along the wall beside her, keeping its distance yet matching her pace. For a moment, she imagined the creature as her only companion in this place. At the alley's end, she emerged onto the open path leading to the hills. The wind here was stronger, carrying the scent of pine and something faintly sweet from wildflowers hidden in the grass. She paused, looking back at the village, its rooftops huddled together against the cold. For a fleeting second, she imagined never returning, letting the hills swallow her. But the weight of the ribbon in her hand reminded her that something still held her here, even if it was only the echo of her mother's voice. The day wore on beneath a ceiling of heavy clouds. Annoyance. Elara returned to the village reluctantly, her steps slow, her gaze fixed on the damp stones beneath her feet. The market had grown busier, voices raised in barter and complaint. Yet, the moment she appeared, a ripple of silence spread through those nearest. A man stacking crates muttered, "Keep her away from the scales," without looking at her. Elara stopped near a stall piled with bruised apples, her fingers itching to touch one. The seller's sharp glance drove her back, her ribs tightening with the ache of hunger. She drifted toward the far side of the square, where the fountain spilled its steady stream into the basin. The air smelled faintly of iron and wet stone. Leaning over the edge, she watched the coins glinting beneath the surface, tossed there by villagers with wishes they believed would come true. She thought of her own wish, but knew the fountain would not grant it. The water rippled as a single drop of rain fell, though the sky above remained stubbornly unbroken. Her quiet was broken by a voice sharp enough to cut the air. "You!" Turning, Elara saw a tall man in a dark cloak striding toward her. The village steward's face was flushed with anger. "You've been told not to linger near the stalls," he said, his words carrying across the square. A few villagers paused to watch, their eyes hungry for spectacle. Elara's pulse quickened, but she stood still, the ribbon clenched tightly in her hand. The steward took another step closer, his shadow falling over her. "Go home," he ordered, though they both knew she had none. Elara's throat felt dry, but she forced herself to meet his eyes. "I'm not harming anyone," she said, her voice small but steady. The steward's mouth tightened, and for a moment it seemed he might drag her away. Instead, he turned abruptly and walked off, leaving murmurs behind him. Elara's knees felt weak, but she stayed rooted to the spot, unwilling to show retreat. Rain began to fall again as the crowd dispersed. Elara moved toward the edge of the square, her mind replaying the steward's words. She could feel the stares of those who lingered, their expressions a mixture of pity and disdain. Passing the last row of stalls, she stepped into the narrow road leading toward the river. The ribbon in her hand was soaked now, its once bright threads dulled to a tired gray. Still, she held it close, as though it might anchor her to something worth staying for. The river's edge was swollen from days of rain, its surface a restless patchwork of ripples and foam. Elara stood on the bank, staring at the water. A fisherman nearby glanced at her and shook his head. "You're back here again," he said, voice rough from years at sea. She met his gaze briefly. "I like the sound," she replied. He snorted. "The river takes more than it gives, girl. Best you remember that." Elara knelt and dipped her fingers into the icy current. "It's the only place that doesn't push me away," she murmured. The fisherman's expression softened for a moment, before he turned back to untangling his nets. She followed the winding path from the river toward the hills. Along the way, she passed the boy with the goats again. This time he didn't look away. "Why don't you stay with your kin?" he asked, walking parallel to her on the other side of the fence. "I have none left," she said plainly. He hesitated. "Then, why stay here?" Elara paused, fingers brushing the wet wood of the fence. "Because leaving would mean they were right about me." The boy frowned as though weighing her words, then clicked his tongue to move the goats along. By midday the rain eased, and Elara wandered into the old orchard at the edge of the village. The trees were bent and gnarled, their last leaves clinging stubbornly. She reached up to touch an apple, its skin mottled but still firm. "That's not yours," a sharp voice said from behind. Turning, she saw a woman with a basket hooked over her arm. "I was only looking," Elara replied. The woman's eyes narrowed. "Looking turns to taking soon enough." Elara lowered her hand and stepped back, the ribbon twisting tighter in her grasp. She left the orchard and found herself walking along the outskirts of the village where the houses thinned. A small fire burned in a stone pit, and beside it sat the old woman who had once given her bread. "You look colder today," the woman said, patting the ground beside her. Elara sat, holding her hands toward the flames. "They still watch you?" the woman asked. "Always," Elara said quietly. "Then keep your head high, child. Their stares are just shadows. They vanish if you stand in the light." Elara smiled faintly for the first time in days. As evening settled, Elara returned to the fountain in the square. The air was still, except for the trickle of water. A young man filling a jug glanced at her. "You've the look of someone deciding something," he said. "Maybe I am," she replied. "And what will you choose?" he asked. Elara looked at the ribbon in her palm, its threads frayed beyond repair. "I don't know yet, but I think it won't be what they expect." The man gave a small nod before walking away, leaving her alone with the sound of the fountain. The pale light of dawn spilled weakly across the river, turning the surface into shifting plates of silver and gray. Elara sat on the bank, knees drawn up, the ribbon wrapped loosely in her fingers. The fisherman from the day before approached, boots crunching on wet gravel, a dented tin cup steaming in his hand. "You've been here since before the sun," he said, lowering himself beside her. She glanced at the cup. "Couldn't sleep. The water's quieter than the village." He handed her the tea. "It's bitter," he warned. She sipped and grimaced. "You're right." He studied her for a moment. "They're saying the council might vote to send you away." Elara's voice was steady. "Would you care if they did?" The fisherman shifted, eyes fixed on the water. "Care? Yes. Stop it? No. I've seen too many swallowed by this place. Once the council sets its mind, the rest follow." She looked at the river. "Then maybe I'll leave before they can pretend it's their idea." He raised an eyebrow. "Leaving's not easy. Out there, the world's not kinder." She smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but at least it wouldn't already hate me." By late morning, the market was busy again, and Elara moved through it with quiet steps. The steward stepped into her path, his dark cloak brushing the wet stones. "The council meets tonight," he said, voice clipped. "You'll be discussed." She looked him in the eye. Disgust or judged? His mouth curled in something, almost like amusement. "Both." "Both." She tightened the ribbon in her fist. "And if I'm found guilty of existing?" The steward tilted his head. "Then you'll be encouraged to exist elsewhere." She let the silence stretch. "Maybe I'll decide for myself before you can." His smile faltered, just for a heartbeat, but returned just as quickly. "Be sure you do it quietly, girl. The village doesn't like a scene." She took a step forward, so they were nearly shoulder to shoulder. "Then stop giving them one." She walked past without looking back, leaving him watching her go. The fire crackled softly in the old woman's stone pit, its warmth cutting through the damp air. Elara sat beside her, rubbing her hands together. "They're meeting about me tonight," she said. The woman poked at the flames. "Then give them nothing to meet about." Elara frowned. "You mean leave?" The woman nodded slowly. "Better to walk away on your own feet than be dragged by theirs." Elara shook her head. "If I go, it's like they've won." The woman's gaze was sharp, despite the wrinkles framing her eyes. "If you go, it's because you decided you're worth more than their approval. That's not losing, child. That's surviving." Elara stared into the fire. "And if I stay?" The woman leaned closer. "Then you're agreeing to be their shadow forever. Choose the road where the light can still reach you." Elara's jaw tightened, the crackle of burning wood filling the space between them. Near the hills, Elara leaned against the low stone wall, staring at the grass bending under the wind. The boy with the goats appeared from the slope, guiding the animals with a stick. "I heard about the meeting," he said. She didn't turn. "Everyone has." He stopped a few paces away. "If you leave, I could tell you which road is safest." She finally looked at him. "Why?" He shrugged, eyes dropping to the dirt. "Because I'd want someone to do the same for me." She smirked faintly. "No one would try to drive you out." He met her gaze again. "Maybe not. But I know what it's like to feel like you don't belong. And that's bad enough without having to guess which road will get you hurt." She studied him for a long moment before saying, "If I go, it won't be because I'm afraid. It'll be because I'm done waiting for kindness." His mouth tightened, but he nodded. "Then be ready before the sun falls." By dusk, the sky was a deep slate, and the village lanterns began to glow. Elara stood by the fountain, water trickling steadily behind her. From the council hall came the muffled hum of voices. She imagined them, leaning in, whispering, deciding. "They don't know me," she murmured aloud. "They only know the story they've told each other." A villager hurrying past glanced at her, then away quickly. She gripped the ribbon tighter, feeling each fray against her palm. "Let them speak," she said to herself. "I'll speak louder with my feet." The bell in the church tower tolled once, deep and slow. She looked toward the hills, the path she had walked before, and for the first time she felt it was not leading her away, but toward something. Night had fully settled over Darrenbrook, the rain-slick stones outside the council hall glistening like black glass under the lanterns. Henri. Inside, muffled voices rose and fell in waves, their tones shifting between heated and dismissive. Elara stood in the shadow of a narrow alley, the ribbon wound so tightly in her fist that her fingernails bit into her skin. Through the hall's open window came fragments of words: burden, trouble since birth, no ties, no use. Each phrase was a stone dropping into her chest. A door creaked, spilling warm light into the cold night, and the fisherman stepped out. His eyes widened at the sight of her. "You shouldn't be here," he said, stepping closer. "Why?" she asked. "Afraid I'll hear what they really think." He hesitated. "They haven't decided yet." Elara shook her head slowly. "They already have. And so have I." The fisherman's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" She met his eyes. "It means their decision won't matter when I'm gone." He took a breath as if to argue, but she turned sharply, her wet hair clinging to her cheeks, and stepped into the dark street without another word. The hill path was slick, but Elara walked with measured steps, the night air crisp and smelling of wet grass. At the fence line, the boy with the goats stood waiting, a small lantern swaying in his grip. "I thought you might come," he said quietly. "And if I didn't?" she asked, stopping just out of the lantern's reach. "Then I'd have waited anyway." She stepped closer, the light touching her face. "You're really going?" he asked again. "If I stay, they'll decide my life for me," she replied. "If I go, at least I decide for myself." He nodded once, then leaned over the fence. "The road east is rough, stones, mud, and wolves if you're unlucky, but it's safe from them." Elara tilted her head. "Why help me when most won't even speak to me?" The boy glanced toward the village lights. "Because you look like someone who's been told no too many times, and someone should tell you yeses at least once." She gave a small, unsteady smile. "Then this is the first yeses I've had in years." He raised the lantern a little higher, his face half in shadow. "Go while you can before they decide to chase." She nodded, turning toward the path without another word. The river crossing lay ahead, its dark waters rippling under the pale shimmer of moonlight. Elara slowed when she saw the hunched figure waiting, the old woman with the patched shawl. "I thought you'd come this way," the woman said, her voice carrying over the water's quiet rush. "Why wait for me?" Elara asked. The woman's smile was small. "Because goodbyes deserve to be said, even if you never asked for them." Elara's throat tightened. "If I leave, what am I?" she asked, her voice catching. "You're not theirs anymore," the woman replied firmly. "That's enough to start with." Elara stepped forward, taking the woman's weathered hands in her own. "You gave me bread when no one else would," she said. "And words I'll keep longer than the bread?" The woman's eyes glistened. "Take them both with you. One will feed your body, the other, your will." Elara tried to speak, but the words tangled in her chest. Finally she whispered, "Thank you for seeing me." The woman squeezed her hands. "Go, child. And when you look back, make sure it's only to see how far you've come." The path beyond the river was narrow, the mud sucking softly at her bare feet with each step. Halfway up the slope, she stopped and turned, the village lying in shadow below. A few lanterns still burned, their glow faint and far away. "Goodbye," she whispered into the wind. Then, softer still, "You will not decide me." The breeze caught her words, carrying them down toward the rooftops. She thought of the council hall, of the stairs, of the days she had endured without kindness, and then of the faces that had offered her fragments of it. She tightened the ribbon in her hand, its damp threads pressing into her skin like a seal on a vow. Turning back to the slope, she pressed on, the sound of the river fading behind her. At the crest of the hill, she stopped once more. The land ahead stretched wide and silver under the moon, rolling fields, distant dark woods, and a sky scattered with faint stars. She drew a long breath, the air sharp and clean, carrying none of the heaviness she had known in the village. Holding the ribbon to her lips, she spoke aloud, her voice steadier now. "Mother, I'll make something of this life. I'll make it mine." The wind moved through the grass like a low answer. Behind her, the church bell rang once, a deep, slow note that carried no threat now, only a strange finality. Elara stepped forward, her stride firm, the hill falling away beneath her feet. Within moments, her small figure was swallowed by the night, leaving only the moon and the ribbon's pale flutter in the darkness.